The next word going down, theos, is God. It's a noun. And then ace is a preposition rendered to. Ton is the article rendered as the. Iona is the Greek word for age. The English word for age, it's a noun. To is the article of the, is how we render it in English. And then ionos is age in the noun again, same root word as we saw earlier. Kai is the conjunction and. He is the article the. Chrabdos is the noun scepter. Tes is the English word of, it's an article. Sorry about that. Euthutetos is the noun righteousness. Chabdas, again, is the noun scepter. The word the there is just added by translation, but it doesn't actually show up in the Greek. The article tes is the article of the or the in the English. Basileas, from where we get our English word basilica, is the English word kingdom. It's a noun. And then su, with the little star next to it, is the word of you. It's the personal pronoun again. All right, let's drop that back to 250 where I was earlier. All right, so here's another look at the Greek of these particular verses. When we look at this particular article again, ha, in the vocative masculine singular, the definite article, including the feminine he and the neuter to in all their inflections, the definite article the. So under ordinary circumstances, it's just a definite article. The Greek Strong's number 3588 is the word ha. But for our particular Greek use right now, it suddenly turns into the vocative. All right, and why is that so important? In the book of Hebrews, we'll eventually look at verse 9, but I don't want to tonight. In the Septuagint, this is what I wanted to show you. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is a right scepter. A popular English translation that's similar to the KJV, where it uses the Greek tes basileia su, the kingdom of yours, instead of the kingdom of his. So this one has the right scepter, and we can see that right there. So these renderings that we're looking at in the Greek, let me just highlight them for you. Well, first, the Hebrew there, once again. Kisacha Elohim olam ve'ed shevet mishor shevet malchutecha. In the Greek, we see two different translations from the Septuagint. The one on the left here is the Alexandrinus version of the Septuagint. The one on the right, which is here, is the Vaticanus version of the Septuagint. And in this case, they are both identical. Hathronas su haltheas eston iona tu, ionas chrabdas euthu tetas he chrabdas tes basileas su, which reads identical to the Vaticanus here on the right. Identical, word for word. So the English translations below are going to be identical. At least they should be. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A rod of righteousness is the rod of your kingdom. And then the alternate version, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Rod of righteousness is the rod of your kingdom. So no, from between the Alexandrinus and the Vaticanus, no variant that I'm detecting exists. But when we click on this word ha in this particular tool that I'm using, shows it as the article nominative singular masculine, meaning the, this, that, the person who, the thing, that, ha, de, hoi, de, but, he, they, o, in its particular different forms. And when we look at the forms between the masculine, feminine, and the neuter, and the singular and the plural, we have a nominative case, a genitive case, a dative case, and an accusative case. And we don't see the vocative on this particular tool, in this particular tool. But when we look at other tools, like we just looked at here, we definitely see that this is in the vocative. Oops, didn't mean to go to verse 9. Right here, ha, right here. Let me highlight it. Article, vocative, masculine, singular. Another tool here. This right here, if I highlight that, you probably can't see it because it's too small, but I'll blow it up in post-production. Ha, art, VMS. V stands for vocative. Now, before you begin to cry foul that, boy, Ariel, you're putting all your eggs in one basket when it comes to understanding this passage, just using one simple, not only Greek word, but just a simple Greek letter. Are you, Ariel, as a Trinitarian believer, hanging all of your understanding on one single Greek letter? Is that what am I doing? Is that what I'm doing? Well, no, that's not what I'm doing. However, I'm only highlighting all of the Greek differences between the vocative and a nominative because of the way biblical Unitarian rejects and forms their argument against the New Testament reading as the writer to the book of Hebrews has reproduced it from the Greek Septuagint, because of the way they reject the vocative and hang a lot of their argument on the translational bias that they say, the interpretive issue. They are the ones making a big deal out of the interpretation. Let's look at these interpretations from their perspective. The revised English version.com, which is available online for free for anyone who wants to look at it. This is Biblical Unitarian's own proprietary version of the Bible, the REV. They created this version, the same interpretive team that drives that website at biblicalunitarian.com created this particular version as far as I can understand. And so when we scroll down to verse 6 in their version, you can see right here, oops, sorry about that. Let's try that one more time. I clicked on the verse without realizing it. When you look at this particular verse right there, your throne is God forever and ever. Notice they take the vocative form of this clause out of their English translation and insert what we call the nominative clause instead. Your throne is God, or God is your throne. You can swap it around into still the same syntax, the same nominative representation. Your throne is God forever. A scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. We've already discussed how what this means from their perspective is that God and throne here are kind of representing what we might almost refer to as evasive synonyms or anthropomorphisms or symbolic language that represents the authority that God grants to this earthly king. Your throne, your authority is God, i.e. from God. It's God's authority that rests on you. And how long does it rest on you? Forever and ever. So to say that your throne is God forever and ever is to say that the authority from God is the authority that establishes this righteous king and allows his kingdom to be established forever and ever because God himself is eternal. That's what it means to say your throne is forever, or God is forever your throne, or your throne is forever God, or something to that effect. Or as we're going to see here in the case of the Jehovah's Witnesses version, as well as the standard Hebrew, the Jewish version, the throne that's given of God. So their own version, the Biblical Unitarian version of the book of Psalms, has your throne is God forever and ever, right? They take out the vocative. That's why I've kind of highlighted it. They remove the your throne, O God, because if it's addressing God, if the verse is addressing an earthly king by calling him God, there's only two possibilities in the mind of the Biblical Unitarian. One, the word God here, the Hebrew word Elohim, the Greek word theos, is either the lesser use of the word Elohim, i.e. a non-high Christology, a non-deity form, where we call Moses Elohim before Pharaoh. It doesn't mean that Moses is God, like God is Elohim. It means the lesser use of the word in the Hebrew, meaning magistrate or judge or person of authority, a prominent person. So the word Elohim it must be understood by context. Most often the context is God is the Elohim, the deity who we refer to as the one being known as God, the single God. There is the only one true God. He is Elohim, right? But in lesser contexts, the word Elohim in the Hebrew can refer to a human ruler. So Biblical Unitarian says that's one way that the word Elohim is being used in this verse. It could be translated that way, but they instead opt for taking the word Elohim as a type of evasive synonym, a metonym, as it were, a stand-in word for the word God in its representation of authority. Your throne is God forever, meaning the authority that is vested on you and rests on you is from God, and it's implemented in the form of the way you rule from the throne. Your throne is God forever. I'm telling you what they're saying, but I could just read it. Your throne is God forever means that God is the authority, the throne of the king. The word throne there is in quotes, scare quotes, what some people call them. is the throne of the king, and the king reigns with the authority of God. That's what the word throne there means in the biblical Unitarian model, which, by the way, again, has some basis in its truth, right? The Davidic king, whether it's David or Solomon or Yeshua, who's going to be ruling from earth one day, they, in fact, do get their authority from God, right? That's true. I'm not arguing against that perspective. I'm simply saying that what the book of Psalms recorded for us, which is the vocative in the Greek. Remember, the LXX translators did that, not the biblical Unitarian group, not the Trinitarians. We're not the ones who wrote the Septuagint, and neither did you biblical Unitarians, or you Jehovah's Witnesses. None of us Johnny-come-lately groups wrote the Septuagint, right? That was written by Jewish people, Greek-speaking Jews in the early centuries before the time of Messiah. They're the ones who captured ha, theos, and used the word ha there in the vocative form. So, biblical Unitarian says there's only two ways to look at this verse, and one of them is not the Trinitarian option. So they take the Trinitarian option, they just take it off the table altogether. Look at their rendering from the book of Psalms as compared to their rendering of the book of Hebrews. The quote in verse 8, it says, and I'll highlight the verse for you. It says, but of the Son, it says, your throne is God forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. What do? They simply translated it the exact same way they translated the psalm. They removed the vocative. And they went on to explain that there are some Greek scholars who are Christians who say that the vocative is a perfectly acceptable translation, but it breaks with the context, because the word Elohim, they explain, is used 4 times in this psalm from the original Hebrew, the word Elohim, and 3 of those times it is referring to God without question, and then suddenly it's referring to the king as Elohim. So you have the psalmist. Let me just show this to you because some of you are probably getting lost. The psalmist used the word Elohim 4 times. Starting in verse 3, gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty. Starting in verse 2. You are fairer than the sons of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. Hebrew word, Elohim. Who's the context? God in heaven. Not the earthly king. Verse 2, God in heaven. Skipping down to verse 6, the verse in question. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. Same word, Hebrew Elohim, that we saw in verse 2. Who's the subject? According to we Trinitarians, the subject is the earthly king here on earth. It's not God in heaven. But notice in verse 7, you have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, same word Elohim doubled up, has anointed you with oil of joy above your fellows. So this forms the 4th use of the word Elohim. Who's the subject of verse 7? Therefore, God, your God, the God in heaven, according to this translation. So, according to the analysis by Biblical Unitarian, the word Elohim shows up 4 times in this psalm, and 3 of those times, the context is pointing to God in heaven. He's the Elohim. And yet, suddenly, out of the blue, the psalmist wants to refer to this earthly king as God. They say that breaks the context. And so that's why they pull in a variety of Christian Greek scholars, not a lot of them, but some of them, who say, well, based on context, something's wrong. Why should we translate this as referring to God? Let's look at the other ways Elohim could be used and look for an alternate understanding. So that's why their translation of Hebrews shows up that way. Let's keep going real quick. Let me look at my time. About 30 minutes into the study. I think what I'll do is we'll break it off right here. We'll save this for next week. We'll start right here with the Jehovah's Witnesses version of Psalm 45, and we'll look at their version of the book of Hebrews, their translation. And what we're going to find, I'll just kind of give you a little teaser. What we're going to find by examining the Jehovah's Witness version, the standard rabbinic Jewish version, these non-Christian versions. I say Jehovah's Witness non-Christians because, in my opinion, they're not truly Christian. Even though they embraced Jesus as the Christ, the rest of their theology is so questionable as to render that their claims to be invalid. In other words, this is recognized by mainstream Christianity as a cult. But what we're going to find is that they decide to strip both the passage in the book of Psalms as well as the writer to the book of Hebrews. They strip it of the vocative as well. And because from their perspective, we know that they are like biblical Unitarian in that they create their own proprietary version of the Bible to suit their theology. What they do is they strip it of the vocative, because in so doing, the vocative is kind of in your face and leaves open the possibility that the psalmist is referring to the human king as Elohim, and that entails the possibility that this Elohim is God. Even though there are other uses of the word Elohim in the Bible, it's too close to sounding like the Trinitarian model when you say, oh God. So they're going to opt for their own different translation, which we'll begin to look at next week. But that'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism.